So super. So hello everybody. Thank
Hi.
you for thank you for joining our big event. Um, this is intended to be the first of a series of spanning conversations put together by the Gray Swan Guild. And um, I guess we should get started and maybe pop to the next slide. Thanks. So the Gray Swan Guild, which is hosting this event and hosts many others, we are a collaborative community of sense makers, a global action-based think tank, and what we try to do is craft emergent perspectives, intelligence, content, events, of which this is one, and ideally solutions. Um, Basically a group of people that have come together very organically to try and make sense of the world's biggest societal, cultural, economic, marketplace, and workplace challenges and events. Part of the way we thought we could do that is by getting people to communicate across the barriers that normally separate us. I've been saying that these days we've been um, locked into our bubbles and our demographics, and we need to break past all of those. So demographics, of course, has many dimensions. One of them is generational, and we thought if we could just get a conversation going where we could hear the different perspectives, the perspectives of different generations about the pandemic, we could build a little bit greater understanding and greater empathy. And we hope in the future to have spanning conversations across other dimensions besides just generational. That said, the people we have here do span 5 generations, which is pretty cool. Um, each individual, however, is limited because they are an individual and not an entire generation. So we've asked them to do the best they can to represent their fifth of the global population, just over 1 billion each. Um, but of course, we also want to hear what they think as rather unique and special individuals. So with that, I'd like to ask each of the panelists, and we'll go in order of age because that somehow seems appropriate, and start with Hazel, to just tell the community of members here briefly who they are and maybe one thought about the pandemic and what it's meant to them. So Hazel, if you wouldn't mind giving us an introduction and your thoughts, although probably you need no introduction, it'd be delightful if you gave us one anyways.
Oh, Hazel McCallion, born in 1921. Going to be celebrating my 100th birthday on February the 14th next year. I was in the business community for some 40 years, retired from the business community, and got into public office and was in public office for 44 years. Was mayor of a small town for 3 years, and then mayor of the 6th largest city in Canada for 36 years. I retired from mayor in 2014, and now on many boards, our Toronto International Airport Board, technology boards, as well as Chief Elder Officer of Revere Retirement and Long-Term Care.
Wow. Thank you, Hazel. Arei, would you mind telling us what you've been up to?
Hi, my name is Arei Bierstock. Previously, it was Ruth Ann Rosenberg. I am representing the baby boomer generation, and I am about a year or two beyond that, but I think I've shared enough of their experiences to be able to reflect a little bit on it. I'm a mother of 3, aged 50 to 58. I'm a grandmother of 6, ages 5 above 20 and 1 in her early teens. I've been, by profession, a social worker that involved many, many different hats. So I was fortunate enough to be able to be a psychotherapist, a community organizer, a program developer, researcher, writer. I became involved, I went back to school about 10 years ago to art school full-time, which was wonderful. I've been involved in the business community and in various charitable organizations. And I have been a caregiver, or was a caregiver, for about the past 14 years, until my husband passed away 2.5 years ago. My mother was also passed away only 2 years before that, at the age of 99. So a great deal of my life in the latter years has been involved in caregiving, but now my time is my own. And the pandemic has been a very reflective time for me. Not as hard as for other people, but a reflective time.
Great, thank you. Alex, please.
Hi, my name is Alex. I'm halfway in between. I guess I'm very inspired by Madam McCallion because I'm halfway. So I see that either as the glass half filled or half empty. I mean, you know, potentially I can live another 50 years, which is amazing. And then I also despair a little bit because you mean there's 50 more years to go of this? So, but in any way, it's very inspiring, and I'm very honored to be here. I am currently the honorary consul of Finland in South Florida. So despite my Brazilian last name, which comes from my Brazilian father, my mother is from Finland, and my nationality is Finnish. My career has been in marketing and digital marketing. I have some corporate experience at IBM and Constant Contact. I also co-founded a startup that's publicly listed in Europe, and I helped kickstart the startup and also social media community in South Florida through 2 associations that I helped build. And with COVID, I pivoted to teaching online. So right now I'm teaching small business owners how to do digital marketing, and so far 150 people have gone through my course, and on November 2nd the next one starts. And my takeaway from COVID is you're on your own, basically, is what I've learned, is that you're truly on your own.
Oh, well, I don't know if that's a positive or a very dark sentiment, but maybe we'll drill down that in a bit. Swan, as we get into the younger folk, what would you have to, could you please introduce yourself?
Hello, hello. Thank you so much for having me. Very honored to be a part of this distinguished panel. I'm very self-aware that I'm speaking as a fairly privileged white heterosexual male in Los Angeles and representing the most diverse adult generation truly in American history. I think 44% of my generation are people of color, and then that's really a bridge generation to Amelia's generation, which is going to be even more diverse, which I think, it's hard to understate how big a shift that's going to be, and maybe we could talk about some of that. My background is in many ways a millennial background, in that it's not exactly linear. I for many years ran a consulting firm doing coalition building and strategic communications around progressive public policy issues, especially focused on energy and environmental issues. And I've spent the past few years running an initiative educating senior corporate leaders about emerging technology and trying to push the biggest companies in the world towards looking beyond their bottom line and looking towards solving some of the world's biggest challenges. So all of my work life has been kind of on some nexus of technology, public policy, and social change. And I would say, just to sum up the pandemic, I would say existential crisis, and I don't necessarily mean that in its most negative context, but let's leave it at that, and we can build on that.
Super. So that's an existential crisis in the good sense. All right. Well,
it could go either way.
Could go either way,
Yeah.
right? So back to the half full from Alex. So Amelia, could you please introduce yourself?
All right. I'm Amelia. I'm 18 years old. I'm a freshman at the University of Southern California, which is a bit of an ironic name nowadays due to the fact that the majority of people there are nowhere near Southern California. And on that note, the way the pandemic has changed my thinking is that I no longer think of people as grounded in the physical space that they're in.
Could you just push on that a little bit?
Today, my lab partner and I realized, having worked together for a whole semester, that we only live a few miles apart. It just hadn't occurred to me.
Oh, cool.
And I think it's going to reshape a lot of the way we think about education, among other things.
Cool. Thank you. So we've got a lot of threads to pull on here. I'd kind of like to, though, go through the folks again and ask them to go a little bit deeper in specifically what the pandemic has meant for them and for their generation, at least as well as they can view it. So Hazel, you're representing the most senior population, certainly of the folks here, and of so given that, what has the pandemic, have you been living in fear? Have you been living in optimism? What has this meant to you?
One thing I forgot to mention when I introduced you, I played professional hockey in Montreal in 1940. Female professional hockey. I thought I should tell you. Well, you know, I've been through being born in 1921. I've been through a depression. All of you have experienced a recession. You have not experienced a depression. And that to me was quite an experience as a child growing up, to be faced with the challenges of a depression. The pandemic is changing our whole way of living. It's changing the economic world. It's changing families. It's changing community organizations. It's changing everything. And as far as I see, we went through SARS. SARS was simple compared to this virus now, and that was quite an experience. But this one is even. There's fear in the minds of people of my generation and younger, even from 60 on. They're concerned about the future, and I think we're into a whole new world. Whole new way of operation, both from a community point, from a family point of view, a community point of view, an economic point of view. I don't think we'll ever go back to normal, what we would call normal. So it's been a real challenge, and it's taught us some things, because out of every crisis, I've experienced, out of every crisis, there are good things that happen. I think corporations today are going to become more socially conscious than they were before. I see that on the boards that I serve on. We're going to be more concerned about poverty throughout the world rather than just about our own situation. And that there's got to be more understanding and cooperation between governments local within a country and governments internationally, if we're going to solve some of the problems. I just fear when the pandemic hits Africa and South America, with all the poverty that exists, because I've been to South America, I just can't believe what will happen. Brazil obviously is leading the numbers, but so the pandemic is teaching the world a whole new lesson of how we operate. As I say, very basically, as a family, as a community, as a country, and as a world.
Well, thanks, Hazel. And I certainly wouldn't disagree with any of that. I wonder, are there any portions, I mean, it's very sweeping, of course, what you described, which is appropriate because the pandemic is having such an enormous and broad impact. Is there anything you would narrow down and say to the people of, about the people of your generation that might be different from how other generations are experiencing this?
Well, I guess my generation, I think accepts, is more acceptable to following rules and regulations than the young people today, and even this later generations. One of the successes of how China overcame the pandemic was because when the government tells Chinese to stay at home, they stay at home. When the Western world tells the people to stay at home, they say, oh, you're taking away our freedoms. And that is a major problem today in the Western world, taking away our freedoms. No consideration for one another. No consideration that what they don't follow the rules, that it's going to affect other people. I think we're going through what I call the me generation, the me. Long as I'm looked after, then that's okay. Me.
Well, with that, let's go to Arei as, in some sense, a representative of that generation. Wasn't that one of the terms that was used to describe the boomers?
Which gen? What
The
do you
me,
mean?
the me generation.
The me generation. I thought it was the one down from us, but
It
maybe.
might have been Alex. So,
Uh, um,
yeah, so I'll interrupt. So
think-
you did say that this was a reflective time for you. The pandemic was
It's a
very
very
reflective time.
reflective time for me. And
So-
I have the time, which is to be reflective. Part, which I would say is part of when you look at the span of baby boomers, we're coming between the ages of 56, I think, to 76, or 55 to 75. It's a very broad difference between those ages, because there's the retirees and then those who are moving in that direction. And the pandemic is those who have retired, those of us who have retired, are in a position where generally our finances are not too bad. We're okay. We haven't got that kind of stress because we were preparing for our older age, for that retirement. But those who are approaching retirement, those who are 54, it's not that far away. And money is a huge issue, and jobs are a huge issue, particularly in since the 90s, where there's been a tremendous movement between different companies, people moving and losing jobs and moving on to the next one. I know someone who's had 42 different jobs. She's 54. So when I grew up after the war, jobs were plentiful. They were permanent jobs. One income was adequate to support the family. That's absolutely not the case now. It hasn't been the case for a long time. But for these people in the earlier baby boomers, as they're looking towards their retirement, many of them are sandwiched between their children and caring for older parents, plus the demands of the job market or the lack of jobs that are available. There's tremendous competition for whatever jobs that there are right now. That stress is unbelievable. And I think there's a great deal of fear. Will they be able to retire if they have a job? Will they be able to support themselves? At the higher end, I look at, I'm okay financially, and I'm very grateful for that, but I'm very aware, I don't know how long I'm going to be okay. So many people of my generation have talked about feeling trapped right now. They were finally free to start doing the things they wanted to do, and now they can't do anything.
And they can't do them because they're geographically trapped, you mean?
They're trapped by the virus. Our social activities have changed. They're, very, very difficult. They can't travel. They can't do many of the things that they had hoped they'd be able to do. And they don't know how long they're going to be healthy enough to do it.
Can I spin a slightly different question at you?
Yeah.
People often blame the baby boomers for all the problems in the world, because it's like, you're the guys who, ran our country into debt, your generation, right? You're the guys who structured the world the way it is today, and we are suffering for the decisions that you folks made. Now, I'm not here to dump on you. That's not my point at all. I just want to sort of see how you react to that.
I think some of that is valid. I think we didn't take care of our planet. We rushed ahead with manufacturing, with consumption became a religion. We we didn't consider what we were doing to the planet. We've had periods of yes, debt, but we've also had enormous advances in social programs and a social safety net that have helped people. And there, I hear sometimes a lot of resentment that people in the older part of the baby boomer generation are more financially secure. But what I see happening is that with that financial security, those people are helping others. It's a very philanthropic generation, and they're helping their children who are in difficulty. They're helping their grandchildren. I know many, many grandparents who are paying college tuition. So I think that some of the criticism is valid, and but it's also not enough to just stand there and point a finger. Have the conversations with us. Find out that we're interested also in what you're interested in. We're interested in making a difference.
Super.
The
Thank you very
problem is,
much.
I do want to say one thing.
Yes.
I think that retirees are our greatest wasted resource. We're invisible. We become invisible. And all this experience and all this knowledge and money is available to everyone in terms of being able to have these kinds of conversations that we're having right now.
Super. Thanks. I think that's a great point. And just before we jump to Alex, I just want to say something I should have mentioned earlier. We have allocated some time at the end of the session for questions from the audience. So please pump them into the chat, and we'll do our very best to get to as many as we can. So speaking of conversations and reflections, Alex, you've thought about the pandemic more than just about anybody I know. So tell us again, from a generational, what are sort of the grander insights that you've come to?
Thank you, David. I mean, I could listen to Hazel and Ariel. I mean, that's so interesting, and I can learn so much from them. And I agree with Ariel that, you know, especially in the US, we don't pay enough respect and attention to our elders, and that's a missed opportunity. And definitely feeling very inspired by both of them, and also by Hazel and her energy, which is just amazing. What a inspiration. You know, when I say that you're on your own, what I mean is with COVID, a lot of people got a pink slip. A lot of people got laid off, got fired because of the economic necessity. A lot of businesses could not support, you know, they had to close their doors. And so a lot of people found themselves without a job, right? And so, you know, the employer did not have your back. And then in the US, at least, the payouts, like there was no social safety net here. I mean, there was some payouts. People got it super late, like it took months for these checks to start arriving. Like people had no income, like no way to pay rent. It was not clear whether they could stay in their apartments or not because they were not paying rent. A lot of people are in arrears. And so, you know, your employer and your government did not have your back. And then many people found themselves now in 24-hour quarantine or lockdown with their partner or their spouse. And the home situation, not for, you know, for some people it's nice. So for some people they have a nice home situation. But for some people they learned that their spouse is not the person they thought. And so there was a lot of domestic abuse and a lot of toxicity going on. Because people were forced now to live together. You know, they were partners, but now they're forced to be in the same four walls together, and it was not always pleasant. So, you know, the government, your employer, and your spouse or partner did not have your back. You're truly on your own, and you have to, like, on your own, figure out what's going on. Is COVID really? Because, you know, with politicians saying that everything is fake news and everything, so what is actually going on? Is COVID real or not? Do I need to wear a mask or not? Like, you really had to figure out for yourself what kind of risk would you tolerate when you went out? Do you go out at all? What do you do? Do you carry around a hand sanitizer? The information was all over the place and people didn't know how to do. So you had to figure out for yourself what was your way of being in integrity during this period. And for many people, for the first time, they had to figure out, wow, I'm really on my own on this planet. Like, I have to figure out things for myself, which can be scary. So a lot of people were facing their fears of being unemployed, fears of not paying the rent or the mortgage, lots of very heavy, fearful shadows coming out. Not only did you have all these fears to face, but figuring out also that you're truly on your own. This brought out a lot of trauma for people, a lot of shadows, a lot of stuff from the past would come out, and people now had the time to reflect, as Ariel said, and really think about all these things, like how did my life turn out this way? And so it's been a very kind of like heavy period for a lot of people, I believe. People also figuring out that where was I spending my time? Like I had such a busy schedule all the time, running around, and now I have all this time. I'm home. I can't go anywhere. Where was I spending my time? And where was I spending my money anyway? Like now I can't go spend money. Like if I want to spend money, I have to do it online. Where was all my money going? And so kind of a reprioritization of what's important, and also new understanding of how important relationships are, because you're forced to be alone at home, and so you're now understanding how important relationships with other people are. So there's kind of like a deprogramming going on, like people understanding like, oh, these are the programs that I was running. Where did these programs come from? Who taught me these programs? What was my education, culture, media, laws, politics? Why do I believe the things I believe? Why do I believe I needed to be busy and buying stuff all the time? So there's like a deprogramming that's going on, and a reprogramming of like, what do I want the future to look like? And so in this sense, and I'll just end with this, we're in a liminal period. A liminal period means a transition. And this transition, Hazel was talking about it, is like the Great Depression. It's a huge transition where people were going through similar things, facing their fears and their shadows, deprogramming, reprogramming. So that's a liminal period. Another liminal period was with the New Deal and all the social programs coming in. There's a huge reprogramming of society. 9/11 was a big one too. And COVID certainly is as significant as those other. It's a liminal period where a caterpillar goes into a cocoon or a chrysalis and comes out as a butterfly, hopefully, or a moth. And that's what's happening with us.
Although sometimes it feels like we're not going to come out, but maybe that's not true. We'll see. It's also interesting to me that not only did what you say reflect on Hazel's comments about sort of these critical transitional periods, like the depression that she mentioned, but also you spoke very much to Arei's time of internal reflection and the likely results of that. So we'll see. Anyhow, speaking of reflection, Sean, would you like to reflect on any of those comments, or maybe help us understand the good side of the existential dilemmas that we're facing?
Yeah, so I think every generation is facing that moment of reflection right now. I think we've all been forced into a reflective period. But to what Hazel was saying just now, out of every crisis, positive change does come. What's that saying? A crisis is a terrible thing to waste, right? I think there's going to be a major wave of innovation and change coming out of this crisis, and that is corresponding with a moment at which the millennial generation is rising into leadership roles in government and in business, and we didn't face crises on the scale of what Hazel's generation faced with the Great Depression and a world war coming within a decade. But as we were kind of entering the workforce, we had the financial crisis hit in 2008, and now COVID has hit. So we've kind of hit two once in a generation financial crises, economic crises within one generation here as we're entering the workforce. But I think it's the diversity of our generation and the learnings of those crises that I think gives the millennial generation pretty valuable perspective on some of the inequalities and injustices that still run rampant in our society. And I think the pandemic has brought a lot of those to the fore. And I think my generation is pretty keenly aware that the status quo just isn't working. And I think, you've seen the millennial generation taking, leadership roles in, the Black Lives Matter movement, for example. I think the millennial generation, because of its diversity, is keenly aware of, how much communities of color have been disproportionately affected by COVID from a health perspective, right? And are looking to drive change. I think my generation, which has entered the workforce during the period of the gig economy, sees how ludicrous it is that our healthcare system is tied to your place of employment, right? And so I think my generation is kind of uniquely suited to see how flawed the status quo is. And to Alex's point, I mean, I think this really is a liminal period where the millennial generation is going to kind of lead the way towards making change happen in some major ways, especially as we rise, out of this crisis. And I think the millennials are fairly uniquely suited to rise into leadership roles coming out of this.
Super, thanks. Wow, very interesting. And I'm starting to see certain themes emerge, but before we coalesce around the themes, let's give Amelia, our Gen Z representative, a shot here. Anything to say?
Okay, well, like Sean said, I think my generation's been pretty disenchanted with authority, with government. We know the government hasn't got our back, and that hasn't been a question among my generation for a long time. And I think that's manifested partly in people in my generation going out in marches and BLM anti-guns, but also in doing some incredibly stupid things on college campuses and kind of being a me generation of ourselves. What was the other thing I was going to say? There's this tension in my generation between being an adult, because many of us are, we're taking college classes, we're voting, and yet we're still living with our parents.
Ooh! No, sorry.
Many of my classmates have, gone off to college and then been yanked back into their old roles of like child underneath their parents. And there have been a lot of conflicts there because, who's making the decisions, who's making medical decisions. The politics often don't line up. And so we're kind of caught in this in-between space between child and adult, thinking that we had, gone on to the adult phase, but then not quite there yet.
Very interesting. So I think all of you talked about social change in different ways, but it emerged actually as a universal theme, which I was really kind of struck by. Hazel, you spoke about businesses specifically changing, that the sort of the drive towards profit, I think that was your term, or it might have been Arei's comment, that's not going to stand anymore. Do you think that's, having grown up when I did at the tail end of the baby boom generation and seeing how fundamental the drive for profit was overall else, and how that was rationalized as the good, profit equals good because you must be serving people to generate that profit. It feels like such a fundamental paradigm shift. It's hard to believe that can get washed away even by something as grand as the pandemic. So I want to sort of put you on the spot a little bit because you suggested that it would be. So what do you think? Do you want to defend that, or do you think you want to soften that a little bit?
Well, quite honestly, corporations now are giving more consideration to their employees than they did before. Unions had to bring about a lot of change rather than the corporations making the changes. And but I see from the boards that I'm on the Toronto International Airport Board, for instance. We're very concerned about our employees, but then there's the companies have to have more concern for the community. And that didn't exist before. As you say, the drive was for profit. Sometimes the employees were neglected in their drive for profit. And there's regulations now that it's very difficult to fire a person, where years ago you could just lay them off the drop of a hat. So these cultural changes have got to occur. You know, my generation grew up we were taught to save money for a rainy day. We did not live from paycheck to paycheck that the young people or the people today are living. That's why when the pandemic hit, everybody was in trouble because they were living from paycheck to paycheck. My generation was taught to save for a rainy day. Interesting. You never hear that today. I'm old fashioned when I say you better save money for a rainy day. Young people, what do you mean a rainy day? So I've seen such a major change over the years to the point now where we were not ready for the pandemic. We went through SARS and we didn't learn very much from that experience. And then along came this virus that is even more serious than the SARS epidemic. And so we're not prepared because you can't live from paycheck to paycheck. And that's why a lot of people were laid off. Once they were laid off, they had to look to government. Government had to step in. My generation never looked to government. That was the last thing we ever thought of. That was the last you'd ever ask government to do something for you. So there's a whole change now in which people depend on government to do everything for us. It's most unfortunate. Students go to university, they get paid for their tuition. The government helps them with their tuition. When I grew up, I couldn't go to university because my family couldn't afford to put me through university. So I'm only a high school graduate. But the point is that today, young people are assisted to go to university. They're assisted to do everything. They're not taught to be independent and responsible for their life.
So
I think it's most unfortunate.
I'm going to do a jump here and go straight to Amelia, because as the youngest person on the panel, I want to give you the opportunity to respond to Hazel and set her straight.
Yeah.
Okay, I can't help but feel a little bit attacked there. I suppose, yes, the government has a much more active role in our lives in my generation for sure. Though I don't think my generation really trusts our government anymore. I certainly haven't for the last 4 years or so. And I wonder how that'll shift depending on the results of our next election, how trust in our government will change and if we'll actually believe they've got our back. But one way or another, you're right, the involvement in our lives is very extreme.
So Hazel mentioned people have not learned the lesson that we need to save for a rainy day, to be ready for a rainy day. I want to ask, I'll jump to Arei. Are there lessons that you hope we will learn from this experience of the pandemic and lessons that you expect we will learn? Like maybe I should just do the narrower scope. What do you think people will actually learn coming out of all of this?
You know, I before I came on tonight, I wrote some things about this, and I can't help but think about Leonard Cohen's line, our beloved poet, who said, "There is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in." I know that for myself, when I talked about being reflective, and I think Alex, you talked about it as well. What I'm learning to differentiate, or I have differentiated between what do I need and what do I want? They're two very, very different things. And what has come out mostly is relationships, mostly is, to have my basic needs of shelter, and adequate shelter and clothing and clean water met and clean air met. I need touch. Everybody needs touch. And that is so crucial. Babies will die if they are not touched. It is absolutely essential to being human. And this, it becomes something that you go, I value that. I understand that. We haven't been able to hug each other in this period of time. So it comes down to very, very simple things for me as I'm looking at going forward. And most importantly of all is a sense of meaning. I need that desperately. And as I've talked to many people of my generation and even younger, and I'm finding this particularly among the 20-year-olds who are asking that, what is life about? What does it mean? What does my life mean? Does it mean anything? Am I significant at all? These are some of the things that I hope are going to be coming forward. And the other part I want to say in response to Alex and to Sean and to Amelia in particular, I am so happy to hear the values that your generations are beginning to express, to watch you marching on the streets against gun violence, to watch you marching in Black Lives Matter, to watch you marching for climate change and further civil rights and gay rights. This is the most exciting thing for me to see because of your values, the values that the younger generations are talking about. Consumption was a religion. How did we buy that? When you talk about corporations, Hazel, yes, there are changes, but the power elite remains the power elite. And that's why it's so difficult to bring about change. The power elite, corporations exist for one purpose only, and that is to make money for the shareholders. And the shareholders want the money now. That's a change that happened.
So
And that's not, I'm sorry.
It's fine. Let me hold you there. Forgive me. I'm a little stressed because I want to have time for audience questions,
Yes.
but I also want to get to Alex and Sean. And the lessons that you guys think we will or hope we will learn, expect we will learn. Maybe there's interesting gap analysis to do there. Alex, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, so I went to a top MBA school, and shareholder capitalism was very much programmed into us in all our classes as being the top priority, which really meant you favor, as a business school student, when you get out of business school, you're going to prioritize the shareholder above everything else, above the employees, above the community, above everything else, above the planet. The shareholder needs to make their profit first. And really, this is a trend that's happened in the last 40, 50 years, which I believe the greatest generation was immune to, and also a lot of the baby boomers. They were in a liberal system, but I have been in a neoliberal system, which is about really aggressive capitalism. Corporations have pushed through policies which take away regulations, busted the trade unions, increased automation. Manufacturing has decreased. Manufacturing jobs have decreased. There's a lot of outsourcing and offshoring. And so really employees have found themselves very vulnerable over the past 30 or 40 years. And so this is why we look to government for help in this period, because it's not like it was back then when there were trade unions. There was, a lot, tax rates back then were much higher for, certain income levels. There were up to 70% tax rate back then, which no longer exists. And so the government could better take care of people or create infrastructure projects, which today is not happening. We have a crumbling infrastructure here. So this is really a problem which is both Republicans and Democrats have created. So it's nonpartisan. It just, a neoliberal, very consumer system, market-driven system. And, especially Generation X, my generation, feels completely squeezed because we had a very big baby boomer generation and a huge millennial generation, and we're right in between. We had a small generation. And so the boomers held on to their jobs, plus the boomers benefited from better health, so they could hang on to their jobs longer. And the millennials like Sean are ready to take over the jobs when the boomers retire. Well, what about me? And especially now during COVID, I'm teaching online, but what happens after COVID? Do I look for a job? Like, what happens? And will I be able to compete for a job against the likes of Sean? So it's an incredible, I feel the squeeze for sure.
Well, we should ask Sean that question. Do you think
Coming
Alex
for you,
will-
Alex.
Go for it, guys. No, but I mean, again, more broadly and even a little more precisely, I mean, are there lessons, do you think, that we will learn from this, or that you hope we will learn from this?
Yes, if I can briefly push back on some of the cross-generational criticism that's been embedded respectfully. The millennial generation is actually a pretty financially conservative generation. Millennials have savings accounts on a percentage basis more than the generations above us. I think there's some economic realities at play that I think we really need to take into account, and are the reason that many people are living paycheck to paycheck. I mean, the cost of higher education has skyrocketed. We've taken on a huge amount of student debt as a generation. We're often priced out of home ownership, especially in cities, which is a key way to build, multi-generational wealth. We have more economic inequality in, certainly the United States than we have since the Roaring 20s. And I don't think it's surprising that this is a generation and a political moment in which there is a call for more New Deal type government action to cure some of those ills that have built up over the past few generations. So just wanted to push back on some of that.
I see Hazel chomping at the bit. So I'm sorry, Hazel, do you want to
Please.
jump in on this? If not, that's fine.
What?
Did you want? Yeah, I just wondering if you want. I just got the sense from your body language that you wanted to respond to some of Alex's or Sean's comments.
No, I didn't hear a lot of them.
Got it. That's fine. That's probably just as well. No, I'm kidding. Sean, I'm sorry I cut you off. Do you want to resume? Maybe get to the lessons, you think?
So lessons. I think the lessons of this crisis is that, the pain of the crisis isn't shared equally, right? I think we have seen, those that already had, wealth and privilege in society, and, large stock portfolios did great during this crisis. And that's one of the, the most amazing realizations I think we've all had is, the 1% really compounded their 1%ness over the course of the last 6 months, while a lot of the rest of the country, really was living paycheck to paycheck. Or, the homeless encampment 3 blocks from me has quadrupled in size over the past 3 months. And so people are really feeling this in different ways. And, I think one of the lessons that we've learned is that the status quo really needs to shift. Corporations need to shift the way they look at their governance structures. And I think there really is going to be a more active role that government needs to play to fix some of the problems that have been laid bare during this crisis. So I know that's a meta level answer, but I think that's a lesson that me and a lot of the people in my generation and my network are taking from this crisis.
Super, thanks. So Amelia, I'll ask you to just quickly cite any if you can, and then we'll go to audience questions.
Well, I went into the pandemic with a lot of naive hope. I really thought that people were going to take this as an opportunity to, attack a public health crisis together, regardless of political affiliation or country, and really get behind science. I was so sure that was what was going to happen. And in more recent months, where I realized that is very much not the case, I don't know. I've become a bit of a cynic. I don't know what I'm hoping for.
Well, on that cheery note that our youngest and most optimistic generation has no hope left, Let me go to some audience questions, and we've got several of them. And again, I'll apologize for the compressed timeline. I've just been having too much fun monopolizing our panelists. So one of the questions we received that I thought was very interesting, someone asked, what are some ways your generation can reach out and connect with other generations? So if I could just, we don't have time to go through everybody in each one of these. So if anyone wants to sort of pop a hand up if they want to tackle that one, I think that would be great. Anybody want to bite on that question? Thoughts on how your generation could connect with? Yes, Arei.
Well, that's difficult. It's easier when it comes from the younger generations up. It's much more difficult in our society when we have become so inured, in a sense, to our elders, when our elders begin to fade away. People don't ask up. People don't talk up. When I mean up, I mean to the other generations. So even when us older people try to begin those conversations, there's often a lack of patience. I actually have really wanted to do a campaign, which would be, posters everywhere. Do you really know what your grandparents' lives were like? Do you know what they value? Do you really know what they value? Have you asked them? When was the last time you asked your grandparents about what are you doing now? How are you doing, without making assumptions? So I would encourage that. And we need some leadership in that way. We need, COVID has, when you're talking about the changes that you hope come out of this, COVID has thrown a light on our elders, on our seniors, that we can no longer turn away from. We can't stop it. I'm worried, and many of the people of my generation is, where am I going to live? I don't want to live in one of those homes. I can tell you that. I'm very worried about that. We need a whole rethinking about how we engage seniors in our communities. When there are homes like that, where seniors need to be perhaps more together so they have the services, we need to build full communities around them so that there's intergenerational connection. We need to have seniors teaching children, budgeting, housework, how you write a resume. There's so many things that we have to teach you. But I think this is where government comes in. I think more than ever, we need government because we have such massive populations now. This is not the early days when Canada's population was so much smaller and much easier to manage. This is very, very complex, diverse, and different. So one of the things that I want is good government. I need good government. I need government to be leaders in these areas, in climate change, in seniors, in healthcare, in education. We need leaders.
So, well, I don't think anybody's going to dispute that one. Yes, Hazel?
We sure do. We need leaders in government, no question about it. And I think what we're going through now, as we look across the world, there's not too many outstanding leaders. And there's some elections coming up that I hope maybe the people of the United States would decide that maybe the United States needs a leader.
Not mentioning any names, of course. So look, we're at the last 5 minutes. This is some wrap-up stuff I'd like to do, but if I could ask each panelist, yeah, it went by fast. If I could ask each panelist to just make a sort of a very brief final comment, if you would, I'd really appreciate that. And maybe we'll start with Hazel. So do you have some just sort of brief final comment before we wrap up the session?
Well, as I look back over my generation, people work together, communities, farmers would help one another, etc. And then we went through a period that I remember back in after the Depression, that government should do more for us. And we started looking to government to assist us. That was the worst thing we ever did. The big mistake we made was done. Now today, too many people are looking to government to do things for them. And they're not, the young people are not as, I'm chancellor of Sheridan College, and I have to address the graduates each year. And I say to them, you know, this education system is preparing you to take your place in the world. But boy, it's up to you after you graduate, whether you want to really aim to be a success, to contribute back to your community and to your country. There's got to be desire built into our students that they're not there just to make money, that they have a contribution to make the world a better place. And to make the world a better place, it's got to start in each and every local community.
Let's hold you there. Let's hold you there, Hazel. That's a very good stopping point there. And I just want to ask Arei to be quick because we're running out of time.
I think there are amazing potential leaders in our younger generations. I have a great deal of trust in them. I think their values are important. They're facing tremendous crises in the world and on our planet. And I think we need to do everything that we can to make sure that they're educated, that that they can move forward to become our leaders and to take those values forward with them.
Yeah.
Super. Thank you. Alex, quick closing comment.
Okay, 4 points. I think we need a strong fourth estate. The press is so important. I think we've learned that. And we need a strong press to keep our politicians honest. Number 2, fair government. We need fair government that takes care of the planet and communities, not just corporations and shareholders. We need government that takes care of us and reduces the inequality that's going on. And I think third point is individuals are awakening to this. So there's an awakening of how important the press is and how important, the planet and our communities are. And fourth point is digital. I think we are now forever digital in our habits, in Zoom, purchasing online. Our lives have become digital now.
Thank you. Sean?
So I think this period of isolation has given everyone to different degrees a sense of how important community is. And I hope that's one of the big epiphanies coming out of this crisis. I know I've realized how much my community matters to me. Being isolated from my loved ones has been really difficult. And I hope we can rebuild kind of more of a focus on community across generations coming out of this and build a world in which we care about each other more than like vague notions of freedom from tyranny that masks represent. But I think we really need civic education. I think we need citizens that can tell truth from fiction in an era rife with misinformation. And I think that civic education needs to start with the older generations who are increasingly on Facebook and downloading a lot of information that looks a lot like the newspapers of the past and is of a very different kind. And I hope everyone votes. If you're in the United States, I hope you vote. And when you vote, I hope you think about the world that we're creating for future generations and not just about your own personal interests. So thank you very much for having me. Appreciate it, everybody.
So Amelia, tell us quick, last thoughts.
I just want to apologize on behalf of my generation for all the stupid things we've done, partying and not wearing masks and getting drunk on college campuses. I just hope we manage to do better.
Okay, thank you very much. So I want, first off, I'd like to be the first of many to thank the panelists for coming today. This is a very odd role we cast you in, and you've all risen to the challenge beautifully. So really genuinely appreciate your time and thoughtfulness. There's also a few other people on the back end who made everything work. I want to quickly thank. I want to thank Sean Moffat, Andrea Cates, Jill Rosenberg, Maggie Riad, and Jennifer Hay for helping us put together this whole event. And finally, Sean, if you could pop up some of those slides, we'll talk a little bit about the Gray Swan Guild. I know we're already a minute over. So we've got a bunch of events. This was obviously a Gray Swan Guild event, and we have many events and many things we're trying to do to help us collectively commune and make sense of the pandemic together. One thing that we're inviting everybody to do is submit a point of view document around the theme Catching Our Collective Breath. There's a URL on the screen that you can see, and hopefully you could go there, learn more about it, and submit one. We also do these so-called weather vane panels. How are people feeling and thinking? We run these surveys on a roughly 2-month cycle. The September-October one is still up. If you wouldn't mind going there and just letting us know what you think, that would be really important in our collective sense-making efforts. We have our first partner event coming up soon. The CEO of a company called Lately will be talking about the content dashboard of the future and their techniques to use AI to facilitate posting on social media. And finally, next slide. Please get involved with the Guild. Come and check out our website, grayswanguild.org. There's a Get Involved tab if you are interested. We are as far from elite as could be. We are a bunch of, I'd like to think, smart people working together collectively to try and make sense of the enormous changes around us. This spanning conversation is one small part of that. We do many things and we need your help. So please, come check out the Gray Swan Guild and join us. And with that, I think I will once again thank our panelists. We're 3 minutes over, so I'll stop there. Thank you so much, guys. Really glad you joined us.
Yes, and for having this.
Yeah,
Super.
thank you so much, Dave and Gray Swan Guild.
Great, and we will hopefully see you all in the future at future events. Bye all.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Right.
Everybody vote.